Child Protection Week took place between May the 26th and June the 2nd and has been marked under the theme, Every Conversation Matters. Now, despite statistics showing a decrease in child murders, we are constantly confronted with distressing news around gang wars, stray bullets injuring children in the Western Cape, and many other incidents, including a situation where a mother killed her 2 children to prevent their father from having custody. Now, Child Protection Week is a global initiative supported by UNICEF and is aiming to raise awareness around the importance of protecting children. Let's unpack how well we're doing insofar as this is concerned. We're joined by our guest, Dr. Wisani Makhomisane, is a member of the Society of Psychiatrists, to provide insight from a psychological perspective. Also joining us there is Captain Veronica Banks, who was honored actually by the SAPS back in May for securing 67 life terms for rapists and paedophiles. Hopefully, we'll also be joined by a psychologist throughout the course of our discussion, a social worker, I beg your pardon. But for now, to the 2 guests who are with us, it's lovely to have you on the SABC. Thanks very much indeed for making time to speak to us. And what an important discussion this certainly is. And I wonder if I can begin with you, Dr. Wisani. When we try, I suppose, contemplate how well we're doing with protecting the most vulnerable among us, especially children, what kind of assessment would you give?
Good morning, and thank you for having me. It's unfortunate, especially with the case that you raised now that we are dealing with. It is unfortunate that however much we try and get the discussion out there of adverse childhood events, it seems as if there would be one big case that makes us feel as if we are not trying or we are not doing well. Honestly, I think we are trying. I think conversations such as this are helping. Parents are learning and getting to know that this is abuse and this is neglect. So I honestly believe we're doing well.
Yeah. In fact, I understand that you were able to release a paper as part of your organization, which has pointed out, amongst other things, that, by the age of 17 or so, about 6 in every 10 South African children are likely to have experienced some kind of traumatic event. That is a staggering figure and heartbreaking at the very least. In the past, we've been told that children often suffer abuse at the hands of people they know. But through the study, what have you been able to find are the sources of this trauma?
Yes, thank you very much. Indeed, most of the trauma is at home or in the community. The issue with adverse childhood events is that it's not always big trauma where you will say the child was raped. There is the small trauma, the little trauma. Example, a 6-year-old watching their mom or any parent really being abused by the other parent. That is trauma, but it's not the kind of trauma that we would know or we would discuss. And that is the reason why our children are exposed to this trauma to a point where they don't even know that it is trauma. It's almost as if we teach them to normalize trauma. So they live in very traumatic environments at home, at school, or in the community, but we almost normalize because we don't talk about it. It's almost as if it's acceptable that such violence happens in the home.
Yeah. Captain Banks, I wonder if we can bring you into this discussion. I mentioned as part of the introduction that you've been honored by the SAPS for the sterling work that you're doing, in part to protect children. As a start, can you tell us just a bit more about the work you've been doing and what that's entailed?
Well, I'm a police officer. I work at the Child Protection Unit. Currently, I work at a unit called the Serial and Electronic Crimes Investigation Unit. So we specialize in child pornography cases or child exploitation online, where we actually then teach the children all the dangers of the internet. Providing that, at the schools, we actually provide lectures where we teach the parents and the children on internet safety, on how to protect themselves, to not become victims of all these pedophiles online.
Yeah. And we're certainly getting a sense that there's, in fact, an uptick in this kind of crime. Does that kind of correlate with your own experience?
Yes, unfortunately the internet is here to stay, and crimes like this have taken place in the past. Years ago, the pedophiles would go to the malls and then lure their children that way or their victims that way. Now, today, the victims are actually at home. The pedophiles are sitting behind their computers and all their cell phones and luring the children on all the apps that they use on the cell phones. Because parents give their children the cell phones and they do not teach their children of the dangers of the internet, telling them on the different apps where to speak or which people to speak to and which people not to speak to, because sometimes the children don't always get enough attention at home, and then they seek attention from other people who are always there to speak to them. And sometimes this is how the pedophiles are then easy to get their victims to either to meet them, to sexually abuse them, to get them to send naked images of themselves, meet up with them, and then even sometimes be human trafficked to other countries.
Sure, really distressing. I did mention that we're waiting for a third guest to join us, and that's now happened. Let me welcome, as part of our discussion, Preshema Sewpaul, who works as a social worker and, of course, has had interactions with trying to assist many people, many children, I suppose, in some instances, who've sadly become victims of some kind of violence. Preshema, welcome to the SABC. It's great to have you on the program, and thank you very much indeed for making time. I wonder if I can get just your opening remarks as well. We've just spoken about the extent to which we are doing a good job to protect children in society, but I'm hoping you'll be able to speak to us about the theme for Child Protection Week this year, and that's around every conversation matters. Are we having the right conversations when it comes to addressing this issue?
Good morning to the viewers. So I'm the regional manager at ACVV. I have 10 social workers and 5 auxiliary workers within the Child Protection Organization. So with the theme of Child Protection Week this year, it's, having that togetherness and working together, having that unity to protect children using our community. And we must understand, as much as this is government's work, having legislation to protect children, unfortunately the resources are not there. And I say this time and time again, when it comes to the budget speech, very little is put towards the protection of children. Our national manager always highlights, Ms. Nicolette van der Walt, she highlights that during the elections, there's no campaign regarding the rights of the children, promoting the rights of the children. So it's up to the community, it is up to us citizens, putting our resources together to help protect the child, to help prevent abuse, having awareness programs, prevention programs. But as much as we can do that, it's not necessarily always going to prevent all crimes against children. It's just a matter of having the eyes on the children, community members, watching out for other children, reporting it to child protection organizations so we can investigate the matters.
Yeah. Dr. Makhomisane, can we speak about the impact this has on the child if, they've become a victim of some kind of trauma? And according to the stats we spoke about earlier, more people are likely to find themselves in this position and not. So what is the psychological impact of something like this happening at an early stage, especially when we consider how that materializes when these children become adults?
Yes, thank you. If you look at sportsmen, they usually practice every day so they can be excellent sports people. So whatever you do repeatedly, the brain solidifies that as the normal, or the brain works to improve that. So if a child is exposed to an environment, an abusive environment, it means the neuronal connections that solidify, so to say, would be the ones related to that trauma. Whether in future they'll be the perpetrator or whether they'll be the victim. But so our children almost end up like they live in the war zone. They act like they live in the war zone. So when they're in the playground and another child is playing with them, they will attack. They, have uncontrollable fear, uncontrollable anxiety. And sometimes it's difficult because a parent will come and say, I do not know what happened. I cannot explain it, but my child has anxiety, they're biting their nails. But it's this repeated small trauma that says to the brain of the child, we are at war or we are in danger constantly. And when you are at war or in danger, the brain can't think. You act on instinct. You're supposed to act on instinct. And that is what is happening to this kid. So Number one, it affects the learning. It's difficult for you to concentrate on the teacher when you're at war. It affects friendships, it affects relationships, so it basically affects everywhere. If we look at South Africa with intimate partner violence now, if this continues, it would be scary to see what would happen in 20 years, because these kids now are growing up in this war zone, but they will be the parents in 10, 20 years' time. So to a brain that is not matured, trauma is the worst thing, or repeated abuse is the worst thing that can happen to that brain.
Yeah, without a doubt. And, Dr. Banks, I'm wondering whether any kind of case that you've worked in has kind of, in some ways, displayed this. I find in many instances the best way to teach members of the public is through stories. You, for example, have been lauded for ensuring a number of life sentences for people who have been involved in the kind of crimes that harm children. Is there any case that perhaps you could share with us that you reckon drives home this idea of the kind of impact that this trauma has on children?
Yes, I once had a case a few years ago of a perpetrator that he seemed like this ideal father in the community. And he had two daughters of his own, and he would get his daughters to ask their friends to come and visit. And sometimes it would be the cousins as well to come and visit. And then in the evenings, he would actually give the children cool drink. They would all talk about the blue cool drink they had to drink. And then they would drink the cool drink, which actually contained sleeping tablets. And then at night when they go to sleep, he would actually then either sexually abuse them by touching them and or raping them. Whilst doing this, he would take photos and videos, which he would then share online with other perpetrators from other countries. When we caught up with him, we actually found that he had 19 victims. Unfortunately, we were only able to identify 13 of these victims, and the youngest one was 13 years old, 5 years old. The eldest one was 13 years old. And if I take he got 38 life sentences when he was found guilty and sent to court, and he was a self-confessed paedophile. When we caught up with him, he actually had 2.5 million images that he created himself, and I think it was just over 1 million videos he took of himself. And fortunately for those children, except for the eldest daughter, the other victims never knew what happened to them because they were asleep during their sexual abuse. But for the eldest daughter that was awake during this abuse, at one stage she never even wanted to dress nicely, and she didn't want to dress up like a girl. She started dressing up as a boy, and she cut her hair short because she thought maybe if she was ugly, her father wouldn't sexually abuse her again. So yes, these children do go through immense emotional and verbal abuse after they've been sexually abused, and if they don't want to carry on, then the perpetrators usually start verbally abusing them, tell them how bad they are, how useless they are. And some of these children, I don't think they ever recover from all this abuse that they were exposed to.
Sure. I mean, how does one recover from something like that? Incredibly distressing story. And I suppose, Preshema, it gives us an opportunity to speak a bit more about ways through which social workers are empowered to try assist with that recovery process. When we speak about the legislation of this country, I mean, is it hitting the right notes to empower people in your profession to go as far as they need to do, quite frankly, to try and assist?
So within the ACVV, we have recently started training the social workers on the trauma-informed approach when dealing with children. So it's having that understanding that how trauma within even pregnancy affects the child's development, and looking at the children and the cases through a different lens of having that trauma approach, and the way we deal with the clients, we do have a different sort of methodological and just approaching the manner with the legislation that we have, which is the Children's Act. We have to do certain assessments, certain interventions with the family, but having the social workers look at the children through a different lens. From having the trauma approach, it does have us identify and assess children differently to determine what intervention we're going to help the family, recover from this trauma. It doesn't mean that we're always successful in it. It doesn't mean it's always a win case, but it's having to use a different approach when coming to those children, especially with gangsterisms, having grown up in those families, exposed to the family violence, domestic violence, substance abuse. Within our area in the Western Cape, we have high amounts of neglect due to substance abuse. So a lot of the children have learning disabilities and at school are further traumatized because they are seen as children that are not paying attention or do not want to learn. But it's actually that they have a developmental problem because of the substance that was used during pregnancy, making it difficult for them to learn. So it's having that understanding, that trauma-informed approach and working with these families.
Yeah, of course, there are a number of different traumas, Dr. Wisani, and, we focused, I think rightly so, perhaps on the kind of violence directed at children specifically. But we also know that in many instances, children can be weaponized in, for example, a tiff between, two partners or parents. To what extent are we equipped to try and address that kind of trauma? Because, as we said earlier on, what you witness at the early stages of your life, insofar as that is concerned, could also have an impact.
Yes, that is true. We actually would call those children, as much as they were perpetrators, they are actually victims to abuse. There is a parent who made them believe certain things, and sometimes you find that they are sold love. So if you do 1, 2, 3, 4, then I will love you, I will take you with me, or I will do that. So by the time we get to them, you actually find that these kids, not only are they dealing with having traumatized, whether they are siblings or their parents, but they're also dealing with the abuse they received from the one parent. So usually these are the kids that find themselves in, I will say, almost like falling in the middle of the ocean and not seeing which direction is the shore. They are dealing with a lot. They have a lot of guilt that they carry from what they were made to do. And it's important when we sit with them to start by saying, you are a child. You are a child. There is an adult who made a decision and influenced you, but you were a child. And I think when it comes to them forgiving themselves, because when you offer therapy, we give medication, the children have to start where they say, it is not my fault. Yes, I'm the one who pushed mommy, but I was a child and I was being influenced. And it is important for the children to know they were children when these decisions were made for them.
Yeah, that speaks to empowering the children. And Captain Banks, I imagine in your line of work as well, information and empowering both the child and the parent here is key if in fact we are to stop this trend of children being abused, whether online or in person.
Yes, unfortunately, we get where the parents don't always report these matters. Then they think we will just sort it out ourselves, which is not always possible because according to law, you have to report any abuse against a child. And teaching the children as well that if they see some of their friends being bullied, if they know about a friend that has been sexually abused or even physically abused, report matters like that. If you don't report it to the police, report it to a teacher, a social worker. Keep on reporting that until someone actually helps. Because children, we need to teach them boundaries. I know sometimes when they become teenagers, we tend to think, they need to grow up. We need to teach them or we need to treat them as adults. Even though that child is a teenager, they still need boundaries, unfortunately. And we as parents need to teach our children that sometimes tough love really helps them through it. And that we don't always go that extra way to be nasty towards them, but actually just to keep them safe because we love them.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully love is the driving force. And I suppose a parting shot from you, Preshema, in many instances, parents who later realize that their children are in fact being abused will often say that they wish they had seen the signs, because often the signs are there. I think it's worth perhaps just, I suppose, highlighting what some of those common signs look like.
So when a child is being abused, whether there's physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional, psychological abuse, So there's extreme sort of signs of abuse. Physical, obviously, you'll have bruises on the child. The child, if it's happening at school, they don't want to go to school anymore. They're reluctant to go to school, even though it's a bright child. You can see there's certain bruises, or it's a hot day, they're wearing long sleeves, they're hiding something. Those are your physical abuse signs. Then you have children that are usually extroverted in personality, all of a sudden withdraws. They're not wanting to attend functions, they are not as happy, as bubbly. That is a sign that something is happening with the child. So a lot of the things is identifying your child's personality, their behavior, characteristics that have changed. And if you see that, this is what we train teachers to see as well. If they see a change in the child's behavior, then they write out or report some sort of allegation or suspected abuse, in which the child protection social worker will then go out to the homes and investigate. So it's just being from the parent's point of view, looking at your child, observing their behavior, odd behavior. In terms of sexual abuse, some children either become withdrawn into a shell, or they become overly sexual after being abused. So, they are extremes, but it's basically recognizing the change in your child's behavior, that there's something going on to, trigger this change in behavior.
What an important discussion, and long may it continue. Let me thank you for your time. Dr. Wisani Makhomisane is a member of the Society of Psychiatrists. Captain Veronica Banks was honored by the SAPS for securing 67 life terms for rapists and paedophiles. And joining us as well is Preshema Sewpaul, Regional Manager of the ACVV Social Worker Network. To all three of our guests, lovely speaking to you. Thank you once again for your time.